What if Christmas was just a pagan holiday? What if Christmas had never been Christianized? What if, at this very moment, you were decorating a tree not to celebrate the birth of Jesus, but to honor forest spirits? What if the twinkling lights in your house didn't symbolize the Star of Bethlehem, but rather the return of the sun after the winter solstice? Well, some people believe that Christmas is just a pagan holiday disguised as Christian. And today we're going to explore this alternative reality to its ultimate consequences. Welcome to another episode of History Would Be Different. If, the channel where we take the most sacred traditions, and ask, what if it was all just very well-done religious marketing? What if December 25th had never become synonymous with mangers, nativity scenes, and singing angels? Get ready, because today we're going to deconstruct the world's most beloved holiday and rebuild it as something completely different. And the result will make you question every ornament hanging in your living room. First, let us address the historical facts that many people prefer to ignore while setting up their Christmas nativity scene. Jesus probably was unborn in December. Shepherds would be in the fields at night during the harsh Judean winter, and Roman censuses didn't take place during the coldest time of year when roads became impassable and dangerous. The choice of December 25th was strategic, calculated, almost genius in terms of cultural marketing that would change the world forever. The Catholic Church, around the 4th century, looked at the pagan calendar and thought, that giant celebration that everyone has been having for centuries? Let's just redirect its meaning and turn it all into something of our own. Because on that date, the biggest celebration of the Roman Empire was already underway. Saturnalia, a week-long festival dedicated to the god Saturn, filled with endless banquets, the exchange of elaborate gifts, a reversal of social roles where slaves were served by their masters, and lots of drinking flowing through the streets of Rome. It was basically the Roman carnival, but in winter, with all the intensity and excess you can imagine. And soon after came Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birth of the invincible sun, celebrated on December 25th, when the days finally began to get longer after the winter solstice. The Germanic and Celtic peoples had Yule, with its evergreen trees symbolizing eternal life, huge bonfires illuminating the longest night of the year, and fertility rituals that would guarantee good harvests. The entire ancient world was celebrating at this time, and nobody needed Jesus for that to happen. So the church did what any intelligent institution would do when trying to convert millions of people who already had their own traditions. It did unfight the cultural current. It simply surfed on it masterfully. It took the date that was already special, kept many of the customs that people loved, changed the names of those honored, and sold it all as authentic Christian tradition. It was a masterstroke, a strategic communication move that modern propaganda would deeply envy. But here est the question that will define our entire journey today. What if this move had never happened? What if Christmas had remained exactly what it always was, a patchwork of pagan holidays without any Christian connotation to soften things? Imagine the scene. It's the 4th century. Constantine has just legalized Christianity after centuries of persecution. The church is growing rapidly throughout the empire, but it's still a minority in a world full of pagan temples and ancient traditions. The bishops meet to discuss evangelization strategies that will work without causing popular revolts. Someone suggests, what if we created a Christian festival in December to compete with Saturnalia and all those pagan celebrations? But then, in this alternative reality we are building today, the chief bishop raises his hand and says something that seems radical at the time. No, absolutely not. We will keep our identity separate from paganism. We cannot simply Christianize pagan festivals that would compromise our message, dilute our faith, and mix the sacred with the profane in an unacceptable way. Let the pagans have December with all their festivities. We will focus on celebrating the resurrection at Easter, which is the true theological center of our faith. It sounds noble when you hear it like that. It sounds pure and theologically correct, a decision based on solid principles, right? So let us watch the monumental havoc that this seemingly wise decision would wreak over the next 1,700 years of human history. Because, spoiler alert, when you remove Christmas from the Christian equation, you're not just taking a date off the calendar or canceling a holiday. You're detonating the most effective evangelization strategy Christianity has ever developed. And the results would be absolutely catastrophic for the spread of the faith throughout the world. The first immediate consequence that no one foresaw At the bishops' meeting, the conversion of Europe crumbles like a house of cards in a whirlwind. You see, when Christian missionaries arrived among Germanic, Celtic, and Nordic tribes during the Middle Ages, they didn't begin by shouting, "Abandon your pagan gods immediately," because that would be literal suicide. They would be killed or driven out before the sermon was even finished. The real strategy was infinitely more subtle and intelligent. Look, you already celebrate Yule with evergreen trees that represent eternal life. What an incredible coincidence. We also have a celebration at that time of year. Let me tell you about a baby who was born to bring eternal light to the world. Just when you are celebrating the return of the light, it was the perfect bridge, the cultural entry point that made Christianity less strange, less alien, less threatening to people who had their own ancient traditions. If you're realizing that everything you thought was sacred was actually a brilliant marketing strategy, subscribe to the channel now. Because this story is about to get much darker, and the whole of Europe is about to remain pagan in ways that will completely change the world as we know it. But in our alternate reality, where the church refused to Christianize December with all its festivities and traditions, that cultural bridge that facilitated everything doesn't exist. Missionaries arrive in Germanic villages during You'll see the gigantic celebrations taking place, the bonfires illuminating the night, the sacrifices to the Norse gods, and all they can say is, "Stop this, immediately. All of this is sin, and offends the true God." Guess how this ends in practice? With missionaries being expelled from the villages or, in more extreme cases, becoming firewood for the very Yule bonfires they were trying to condemn. Without Christmas as a tool for cultural and religious syncretism, the Christianization of Northern Europe wouldn't be a gradual transition over centuries. It would be a permanent and bloody cultural war that Christianity would likely lose humiliatingly. Scandinavia, which historically was one of the last regions to fully Christianize around the 11th century, simply never truly converts in this timeline. The Vikings continue to worship Thor, Odin, and Freya with religious fervor, and December remains the sacred month of Yule, with all its pagan symbolism completely intact and even strengthened by cultural resistance. England, Germany, Ireland, all these places where Christianity took root, partially precisely because of the Church's impressive ability to absorb and transform local traditions, now resist, with much more force and violence, the new religion that rejects its ancestral festivals. You would have Christian pockets in the large cities ruled by converted kings, of course, but the deep interior where 90% of ordinary people live would remain largely pagan until much later in history, perhaps even reaching the present day with temples of Odin still functioning. The second consequence, which will hurt even more when you fully understand it, is that Christianity loses its most powerful emotional tool of all. Think about it for a moment. What Christian story truly moves ordinary people who haven't studied theology? The resurrection is theologically central to the faith. No one disputes that, but it's too abstract, too complex, requiring an understanding of sophisticated concepts like vicarious sacrifice, substitutionary atonement, and redemption. And Christmas. It's universal in a visceral way. It's a story that anyone in any culture understands instantly without needing explanation. A helpless baby, born in precarious conditions. Desperate parents seeking shelter and being rejected a makeshift manger as a cradle, the absolute fragility of human life. Encountering the divine in a stable. It doesn't need sophisticated theology. It doesn't need years of scriptural study. It's pure emotion. It's immediate empathy that transcends all cultural barriers. Without Christmas as an emotional gateway, Christianity loses that visceral connection with the mountain. Churches would have to evangelize only with complex theology, with elaborate philosophical arguments, with abstract reasoning about divine nature and salvation. And that simply does unwork for the vast majority of ordinary people who work all day and do UNT, have time to study religious texts. The Christian faith would inevitably become more cerebral, more elitist, more distant from people's daily lives, instead of growing as a popular movement that touches the hearts of the masses and transforms entire societies. It would become a religion of urban philosophers and intellectuals, discussing abstract concepts in Greek and Latin, while ordinary people continue lighting candles to the old gods that make immediate sense in their practical lives. The god of the harvest when they need food, the goddess of fertility when they want children, the god of war when they go to battle. The third consequence. And this is the most ironic of all, when you stop to think about it. December becomes even more pagan than it was at the height of the Roman Empire. Because here, the historical detail that many people completely forget, Saturnalia and the pagan winter festivals were in natural decline in the 5th and 6th centuries, with Christianity culturally dominating the empire and being adopted by the emperors. The old celebrations were becoming embarrassing, outdated, something for rural people who hadn't yet evolved to the new faith. But in our alternate timeline, where the church proudly refused to Christianize December and kept its distance from these festivals, these pagan celebrations gain a tremendous and unexpected second life. Without direct Christian competition, without a sacred alternative to offer, Saturnalia adapts to the new times, evolves with society, modernizes, and remains the festival of the year in the Western world for centuries and centuries. Imagine what medieval Europe would be like in this reality. While Christians remain in their churches in December, austere and separated from the rest of society, observing fasts and prayers, the rest of the population is in the streets and taverns celebrating a modernized and even more intense version of Saturnalia. Enormous parties, lasting weeks, a complete inversion of social roles where servants rule over masters for a day, an unrestrained celebration of abundance, excess physical pleasure and drinking. And here is the coup de grace that no one foresaw. Without the Christian Christmas to compete and offer a sacred alternative, many Christians, especially young people who want to have fun, would begin to seriously question why on earth they should miss out on the most incredible and fun party of the whole year just because of religious principles that seem increasingly arbitrary and meaningless. The temptation would be too great to resist. The social pressure would be absolutely unbearable, especially for mixed families, and you would have a constant and unstoppable exodus of people leaving Christianity simply because they did not want to be excluded from the December celebrations that all their neighbors, friends, and even family members were enjoying. Worse still, the church would have no way to morally condemn this without appearing bitter, resentful, and ridiculous in everyone's eyes. You can't celebrate the return of the sun after the winter solstice. Seriously, what is the specific theological problem with celebrating an observable astronomical phenomenon? You can't decorate your house with evergreen plants. Why? Exactly, they are just plants. Vegetation, part of God's creation according to Christian theology itself. If you realizing that the noble decision not to Christianize Christmas would actually be an epic strategic disaster, leave a like below, because the situation is about to get exponentially worse when we reach the modern age. And you'll discover that without the Christian Christmas, capitalism as we know it might never have taken off the way it did, and the cultural identity of the West would be unrecognizable. The church would find itself in an absolutely unsustainable position in the long term. Either it would completely give in and allow Christians to freely participate in pagan December festivals, thus losing its distinct identity and its character separate from the world, or it would maintain the hard orthodox line and lose members en masse. Entire families to a secular festive culture that offered joy, community, and celebration without demanding anything in return beyond participation. And here lies the true nightmare of this alternative reality. Unable to compete culturally, Christianity in Europe would become increasingly marginalized, more isolated, more irrelevant to the daily lives of ordinary people who work, marry, have children, and want to celebrate life without theological complications. Now, let's jump a few centuries in our alternate timeline and arrive in the modern era, where the consequences become even more bizarre and completely unexpected. We are in the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution is completely transforming the world. Capitalism is being born and desperately seeking ways to expand, and it is here that something happens that no one could have predicted in the early centuries. Without the Christian Christmas, modern consumer capitalism itself would have immense difficulties taking off in the explosive way it historically did. Because, you see, the Christian Christmas was the perfect gift that God gave to capitalism, even if no one consciously planned it. A respectable religious holiday that already had a millennial tradition of exchanging gifts, that conveniently took place in winter when people were at home, that had universal emotional appeal across all social classes, and that could be commercialized to the last drop without seeming completely vulgar, because it had this protective layer of deep spiritual meaning justifying everything. But in our alternate reality where December is purely pagan and historically associated with Saturnalia, excesses, unrestrained public drinking, and fertility rituals, somewhat embarrassing for Victorian society. 19th century merchants K.U. sell. The idea of buy expensive gifts for the whole family with the same devastating moral effectiveness. There's no comforting story of baby Jesus receiving gold, frankincense, and myrrh from the wise men of the East to justify rampant consumerism, no powerful narrative of Christian generosity to transform excessive spending into admirable spiritual virtue. No comforting feeling that you're being a good person by buying things because it's Christmas. It's a time for giving and showing love through gifts. What you have is just a pagan winter festival where people drink too much, have questionable fun, and perhaps perform some rituals that are strange to the ancient gods, and that simply doesn't sell products as effectively. The economic result. The modern economy based on seasonal consumption simply doesn't develop with the same brutal intensity we know. Department stores that historically used Christmas to boost annual sales and create the revolutionary concept of Christmas shopping season don't achieve the same irresistible emotional appeal selling for the pagan Saturnalia. Imagine Victorian advertising. Shop now for Saturnalia. Celebrate like the ancient Romans, with orgies and social inversion. It doesn't work in quite the same comforting and familiar way as bring Christian joy to your family this blessed Christmas, does it? Without that Christian consumption machine running at full steam every December, creating social pressure and moral obligation to spend money, the entire structure of modern retail would be completely different, less profitable, less able to sustain the explosive economic growth that defined the entire 20th century. Fourth consequence that will completely shatter your perception of reality. Western pop culture as we know it simply would unexist in this form. Seriously think about how many iconic films, heartwarming songs, classic books, annual TV shows, sacred family traditions, and defining childhood memories revolve around the Christian Christmas. It's an absolutely gigantic cultural universe that shapes Western identity in profound ways we do uneven consciously realize. The Polar Express, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, thousands of Christmas carols that touch people's hearts and define the entire season. The universal image of Santa Claus, that is a brilliant blend of the Christian Saint Nicholas with commercialized pagan elements. Absolutely none of this exists in our alternate timeline. Instead, you would have a completely different December culture, probably more regionally fragmented, stranger to our modern eyes. Scandinavians would still have their intense Yule celebrations with symbolic sacrifices to Odin. Mediterraneans would have modernized versions of Saturnalia that would likely be far more adult and less appropriate for children. Germanic peoples would have winter festivals with enormous bonfires and ancestral rituals that we would find disturbing. There wouldn't be that unified global sense of Christmas magic that even non-Christian countries like Japan have commercially adopted instead. December would be a chaotic mosaic of regional pagan traditions that were never softened, domesticated, and universalized by the Christian narrative of the baby in the manger. And here's the part that should really scare you about the implications of this alternate reality. Without Christmas as a powerful cultural glue, the very concept of a Western world with a shared identity becomes dramatically weaker and more fragmented. Because the Christian Christmas was genuinely one of the few things that truly unified completely different cultures under the same symbolic umbrella, from icy Scandinavia to Mediterranean Italy, from Celtic Ireland to Slavic Poland, everyone celebrating essentially the same basic story, singing localized versions of the same songs, sharing the same recognizable symbols and familiar values. It was an immensely powerful cultural connection point that transcended incomprehensible languages, historically hostile ethnicities, and deeply conflicted national histories. If this complete deconstruction is making you rethink everything you thought you knew about December, share this video now, because the most ironic and disturbing consequence is yet to come. What would happen to Christianity itself in modern times? And the answer will reveal that perhaps the pagan Christmas saved the Christian faith from becoming completely irrelevant in the modern world. Without this Christian cultural unity around December, Europe remains historically much more tribal, much more divided along ancestral identities, much more focused on specific local traditions that separate peoples rather than unite them under a common narrative. idea of Western civilization as a coherent cultural bloc capable of acting together becomes much harder to sustain when Germans, French, English, and Italians are all celebrating completely different gods in December, honoring mutually incomprehensible ancestral traditions, with no common denominator beyond it's cold, it's winter, and people have parties to psychologically survive the darkness. This has gigantic implications for absolutely everything in modern history, from the formation of lasting political alliances to the capacity for transnational economic cooperation, from the shared cultural identity that allows empathy between nations to the very idea that there is such a thing as the West that can unite against common external threats. And there is an even more disturbing detail that no one considered in the early stages. Without the Christian Christmas culturally dominating December as the hegemonic holiday, other religions would never have felt socially pressured to create their own alternative winter celebrations to compete for the emotional space of families. Hanukkah, which historically was a relatively minor Jewish holiday on the religious calendar, only gained enormous cultural importance in the United States precisely because Jewish families desperately wanted to give their children something emotionally equivalent to the magical Christmas that their Christian schoolmates had. It was a matter of cultural survival and family identity. Kwanzaa was literally invented in 1966, a Sun African-American celebration, consciously created as an alternative to the dominant Christmas, a way to have something of their own at that time of year. In our alternate timeline, where December is contested territory between various regional pagan traditions, and there is no Christian Christmas to fight against, these organized religious counter-celebrations would likely never emerge in the form we know them, leaving December as an even more religiously fragmented month, where each ethnic and religious group simply does its own thing in isolation without attempting to create artificial family unity around a specific calendar date. Now we come to the final and most devastating consequence of all, the one that closes the circle of irony in this whole story. Modern Christianity, the one that many fundamentalists defend as pure and separate from the world, would probably be a minority religion and culturally irrelevant today if it had unsold its soul by Christianizing pagan festivals, because the hard and inconvenient truth is that religions that completely refuse to adapt culturally, that insist on absolute purity and total separation from local traditions, simply do not survive as mass movements. They become isolated sects, small groups of fervent believers who are respected for their conviction but ignored by society at large. The Christianity we know today, with its billions of followers spread across all continents, its profound cultural influence, even in secular societies, its ability to shape values and public conversations, only exists because the early church was pragmatic enough to take what worked in local cultures and Christianize those traditions, instead of condemning them outright. It was a brilliant spiritual marketing strategy, disguised as religious syncretism, and it worked beyond the wildest expectations of any 4th century bishop. The Christianized Christmas was the bridgehead that allowed Christianity to penetrate cultures that would otherwise be impervious to the message of the gospel. It was the emotional gateway, the initial point of contact, the bridge that transformed this strange religion of the East into something that makes sense within our cultural context. In our alternate reality, where the Church proudly maintained its theological purity and refused to Christianize pagan festivals, Christianity today would likely resemble other religions that maintained cultural distance, respected by some fervently, practiced by dedicated communities, but fundamentally marginal in the lives of most people. You would have small churches in large cities, a few isolated monasteries perhaps, theological universities for the intellectually curious, but you wouldn't have the dominant cultural presence that Christianity had for centuries in shaping Western civilization as we know it. You wouldn't have enormous Gothic cathedrals dominating the skyline of every European city, because there wouldn't be enough popular money supporting the church to build such monuments. Those cathedrals were funded for centuries by tithes from largely Christian populations, and those populations only became Christian because the church was clever enough to make conversion culturally palatable. And here is the final ironic twist that should make every religious fundamentalist rethink their positions. The pagan contamination of Christmas that many criticize today as impure and compromised was precisely what saved Christianity from becoming an interesting but irrelevant historical footnote. those 4th century bishops who decided to Christianize. December, who chose strategic pragmatism over abstract theological purity, who understood that you need to meet people where they are culturally before you can take them where you want them to go. Spiritual These men were the true architects of Christianity as a world historical force, even if later purist theologians accuse them of unacceptable compromise with paganism. So when someone comes to tell you that Christmas is just a pagan holiday in disguise, and that we should abandon it for Christian purity, you can respond with a complete historical truth. Yes, Christmas has deep and undeniable pagan roots. And this is not a bug in Christianity. It is literally the feature that allowed the religion to survive and thrive for 2 millennia. The Christianized Christmas was the most successful Trojan horse in religious history, ostensibly a concession to pagan culture. But in reality, the tool that allowed Christianity to conquer the hearts, minds, and calendars of entire civilizations that would otherwise have remained impervious to the gospel message. The alternate reality we explore today, where Christmas was never. Christianized shows us with brutal clarity that theological purity without cultural relevance is just another form of historical error. The religions that survive are those that learn to dance with the cultures they encounter, that take what is universal in human, experience the desire for light in darkness, for hope in winter, for celebration in community, for transcendent meaning in special moments, and connect these deep human needs with their own spiritual narratives in ways that make immediate emotional sense to ordinary people. So the next time you're decorating a Christmas tree that has roots in the Germanic Yule, hanging stockings on the fireplace that come from St. Nicholas traditions mixed with Nordic folklore, eating turkey reminiscent of winter solstice celebrations, and singing songs about snow and bells that could icily be pagan winter celebration. Songs to remember the Yule, not participating in a pure Christian tradition contaminated by paganism, you're participating in the most successful cultural survival strategy any religion has ever executed in human history. And it is precisely because of this clever contamination that Christianity still exists as a relevant cultural force in the 21st century. Would history be different if Christmas were purely pagan? It certainly would be. And it would probably be a story where you'd never heard of Christianity beyond history books about ancient and extinct religions. Now tell me in the comments, do you think the church was right to Christianize pagan holidays? Or should it have maintained total purity, even if it meant cultural And if you're realizing that everything you thought was sacred was actually a brilliant religious marketing strategy that worked beyond all expectations, subscribe to the channel now, because we're going to continue deconstructing everything you think you know about history and religion, one disturbing alternative reality at a time.